Then I got a phone call from Alex, and he met me and made sure that I wasn't a complete nut. And then after he vetted me, then he took me to lunch with Noah. So he's the reason we have Noah. So that's a wonderful connection for us. You got anything you want to say about your friend there, Noah?
Anything I want to say? Put you on the spot. Gosh. He's just been a fantastic mentor to me, and I'm really glad that he got to visit us today. Yeah, I went to his church, gosh, 3 years ago when I first got to Dallas. He was the first church I got plugged up with, and he's just mentored me ever since. So he's a really great guy.
And Alex, tell him what you're doing at the SBC.
Well, so thank you, Pastor Steve, and thank you for welcoming me and receiving me and feeding me. So I won't preach. Do what?
We eat good here.
Listen, we're Baptists. I should have suspected. I won't preach, but after 10 years at Hickory Tree Baptist Church in East Dallas, the convention asked me to come aboard full-time. Our state convention, which is the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention, and asked me to develop a mentoring program, something I had done at the church, really only by God's grace. I wasn't planning on doing it for 7 years, and asked me to develop this program to help churches do it, and that's my primary focus, is what I'm calling the Pastor Mentor Initiative. Pray for me, because I have my first soft rollout training this November, and if you were to ask me what it looks like, I would tell you I have no idea, other than just trying to provide another resource for churches and pastors and future pastors to connect and learn and be mentored. And then there's a few other things I do that would probably bore you, but you know, we help churches. Conflict management. I serve as interim pastor at First Baptist Prosper, so we help in that process. And when I met your pastor, I've never knew him, and I'm sorry I haven't known him, because what stories and what a life and what incredible leadership, as you know. And of course I got to meet his sweet bride, and so thankful for him. And when he asked about a quality guy, I immediately knew. I had a few, but I just, all right, Lord, tell me. And Noah was the first one, and I knew he would do. You know, the Lord would work through the rest. So thank you for having me. And if it's okay, I'll hang around for a few minutes and with you guys. And
absolutely,
it's an honor. Proud of you guys.
Yeah, I remember I was praying for a Timothy, and I got a call on a Noah. And I thought, well, okay, I got an Old Testament Timothy. That'll work.
That's good.
Only to learn that it was Noah Timothy. LaHaye? LaHaye. How about that?
Well, I approve of your choice.
Thank you. I know you do, Lily. I know.
That's sweet.
I know your heart is full because you got Noah, and you're doing great.
He's a nice person.
He is. So are you. Hey, we're in the middle of our series, and we're looking at the Sermon on the Mount, which a lot of people thought it was a sermon that Jesus preached while he was on a donkey, but they wouldn't be right. Sermon on the Mount means it's just the first sermon he did, and it was from a little mountain, a little hill. And we're going to get strange advice from Jesus. As a matter of fact, this is considered some of the most confusing advice that we'll get as Christians, given on the Sermon on the Mount. So we're in Matthew 5:38 through 48. And I wrote a little paragraph here. We're easily irritated and impatient. Does that apply to anybody?
No, not really.
Our first response when someone is taking advantage of us is to retaliate, to establish a defensive posture, and not allow anyone an inch of an advantage. And those efforts only intensify when we are dealing with one who is an adversary. At that point, we aren't satisfied with simply standing our ground or being determined. Getting even becomes our agenda. Jesus offers revolutionary, even strange advice in the Sermon on the Mount, he addresses the very best way to handle sensitive situations that involve those who would threaten our personal rights. He often he offers counterculture counsel and dares us to obey. In place of retaliation, release. Instead of hate, love. Rather than getting even, pray. It is with this section of Jesus' sermon that most people have their greatest struggles. Think about that. Those are great struggles. I was thinking of, we even make up Sloans for great struggles, right? Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death. He actually didn't say that, but he gets credit for it. What other slogans can you remember? Remember Pearl Harbor.
Yeah. Remember the Alabama.
Remember the Alamo.
Coke is a real thing.
Coke is a real thing. Not necessarily a personal struggle, but yes. Make America great again.
Yeah.
Build the blood.
Most of us can remember slogans, and slogans especially that are leading us to try to understand what's going on in our world. You know, I've written down here, I want to talk about an American theology versus a biblical theology, because most of us are living under an American theology. You know, there is actually a difference between American theology and biblical theology. For sure. I've written down 4 areas. My right to dignity. My right to dignity. I should be considered in every situation. As a matter of fact, if you attack my dignity in any way, I'm going to sue your pants off, right? And that's the advice of the world. That's the advice of our culture. I'm constantly protecting my dignity, who I am. And you want to come after me, I'm going to come after you. And it's a dog-eat-dog kind of confrontation. And that's an American theology. And we can see it. And now with the how people are incivil, is that a word? No longer civil?
Uncivil.
Uncivil?
Uncivilized.
Uncivilized? I mean, I told you Sunday, I was talking to a couple guys and I mentioned, the problem with our world is we have no ethic. We have no, just etiquette, just natural etiquette. And the other guy said, yeah, we got no manners either. And so we don't treat each other like we should. It's because we're all fighting for some kind of personal dignity that we think belongs to us, just automatically. That's an American theology. It goes under other names like entitlement.
That's what I was going to say.
We're entitled. I heard a guy say the other day, and it broke my heart. He was a lawyer. And we were in the middle of a discussion, and somebody mentioned something about one ministry was fussing with another ministry and it looked like it was going to have to go legal. And he said, most entitled people I've ever met, Christian ministries. And I thought, I wanted to argue. But then after all, I realized again, he was a lawyer.
You lose.
Well, I don't know if I'd lose. It's one of those, my dog can whip your skunk, but I'm not sure it's worth the fight. It's just one of those things, why get into it? But he had that as part of his truth, that Christian people are the most entitled people of all the people he knows, of all of his clients. And he said, normally I don't take a Christian organization. He said, I just don't like dealing with them. They feel like they're entitled. Entitled to my free time, entitled to my opinion. And he said, nobody else thinks that way. And I thought, yeah, the right to dignity. Second thing is my right to comfort. Most of us believe that us being comfortable is God's will. I don't know where we got that idea. Matter of fact, everything I read in the New Testament that Jesus talks about is about my discomfort. As a matter of fact, some of the very few areas that I was pretty comfortable with, Jesus has jumped in the middle of and said, no, you shouldn't be comfortable with that. different. We have this tendency to think that everything should be our way. We all should get our way. Hey, get up, get on today, have it your way. Who was that, McDonald's?
Yeah.
See, I'm thinking that's like last week, but that's like, what, 30 years ago now? And we've spent a lot of time looking out and after our own comfort. And when somebody begins to attack your comfort level, your comfort place at work, or your comfort place at church, or your comfort place wherever you live, when there's an attack on that, you begin to fight back as though that's a God-given right. As though somehow in the Constitution it says you have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of comfort. It's not anywhere. Have you ever noticed how not too many people care about your personal comfort? I'll guarantee you, you're probably the most, you're probably more in tune with that than anybody else around you. You know, when you sit down, I know that, like when Donna and I sit down, she likes to put body parts on top of me. You know, like her feet or her legs, you know, so I can rub them, you know. Or if I'm really comfortable, she likes to get like right in front of me so I can rub her back, right? That's about her personal comfort, not mine. You know? But I can't say this. I can't look at her and go, get off me. It's hot. You can't do that. Or you can. And I would say it's not effective, but it's effective. She'll move. But then when you want her on you, she's not coming back. You know what I'm talking about. My comfort's more important to me than it is to anybody else. Like I'm here, and how many of you are going, well, I hope he's comfortable tonight? Nobody. Nobody. You're concerned about your own. And we pay attention to that. So that's a theology, it seems like, of our life. And then my right to privacy and my own personal schedule. Yeah, that's a big one. You know, you're not going to tell me what I can't do. You're not, no, it's up to me. I'm going to make my own schedule. You know, being in the job I'm in, I get to interface with millennials. And yeah, I'm just thrilled. No, he's not a millennial. He missed that. He's like an old soul. But most of the millennials, you know, you talk to them, and I remember I was interviewing this gal about being a part of, you know, my little organization, and she said, so what time I got to be in here? And I said, well, you know, it's pretty flexible, sometime between 8:30 and 9. And she said, in the morning? I said, yeah. And she said, well, how long do I have to work? I said, you know, we like for you to stay till, you know, like at least 5:30, because that's when kind of some of the clients die down. You get that 5 o'clock rush, and then about 5:30 you can go home. And she said, oh. And I remember looking at her and go, does that not work for you? No. I said, what would be better for you? And she actually looked at me and said, I'm really way more productive around 10:30. If I could come in around 10:30, that'd be better for me. And I go, oh, yeah, sure. And she said, but I'd work a little later. I'd work till 5:45 or 6. I didn't hire her. I was afraid to ask her, did you want to bring your doggy with you? Or, you know, but that's that whole idea about I get to make my own personal schedule, and I'm in charge of my own privacy, right? I mean, I'm starting to get upset at Google, real upset at Google, because I get in my car, and I start my car, and it tells me where I'm going and how long it's going to take me to get there. And I'm like, wait a minute. How do they know that? Well, they know that because that's where I usually go at that time in the morning. But I don't want them knowing it, right?
They follow your phone.
Yeah, they're following me. And I'll go to Google something, and they'll go to all this stuff that I've liked, that I've seen before. And, you know, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. This is my privacy. I don't like them in there. Get them out of the phone. Actually, one of the executives at our office puts a piece of tape over the camera part of her computer and of her phone. And she said, they're watching you all the time. And normally I think, wow, man, you got a little paranoid problem. But now I'm thinking, maybe not. So I turn my phone upside down all the time. So if you're gonna watch me, I'm gonna be upside down. So but that's important to us. That's part of the whole American theology. And then my right to personal possessions.
Love our stuff.
Love our stuff. Build me a garage, and then next house I need a bigger garage to get more stuff.
It's kind of like that song, 3-car garage I'm still building on.
Yep. I didn't know there was a song like that.
Yeah. Look at Box, Texas.
It's gotta be a country song.
Waylon Jennings.
That's in there?
Yep. 3-car garage still building on.
Keeping up with the Joneses.
When do I get my 3-car garage?
Hate to tell you, it's not happening.
You know how you can tell that we bought into the American theology as it relates to my possessions? Look at how many possessions you're still paying for that you don't really own. They now possess you because you bought them when you didn't have cash. You put down the old proverbial credit card, right? And now you're buying it, but you're buying it and it's got 18% interest attached to it. And you're in bondage to paying for stuff that you think is yours, and you're not even close to owning it. I look at, you know, some of the cars that I see young people drive up in. I promise you, I will get couples that come in for counseling. And I can't do it now because my new office doesn't have any windows. But I'm getting ready to get an office that's got a window again, and I'll be happy. Because I feel like I'm hermetically sealed in there now. But my other office had a window, and I'd sit there and I'd watch this couple pull in. And they would, you know, Mama would come in and she'd be in like a Range Rover, you know? And then here he'd come and he'd be in like a Lexus sedan. And they come in for marital therapy and they tell me, we really can't afford this. And I'd look out the window and go, y'all got about $200,000 tied up in automobiles. What do you mean you can't afford this? Well, we don't own those. But they were their possessions. I call them $35,000 a year Frisco millionaires. And they said, you mean you think we're making $35,000? I said, no, I think you're going in debt $35,000 every year. And if you've been married for 3 years, you're pretty deep now, what, about 120? And they'll look at you like you read their mail. These are the things we goofed on. It wasn't different for the Pharisees. It was no different. These were the same thing. They had their right to their dignity. They were the best of the best. They had the right to their comfort, and they were going to be comfortable no matter if anybody else wasn't comfortable. Remember, I talked to you last week about Korban, and they'd see the old folks coming, and they'd say, sorry, you can't live in our house because we've claimed Korban. It belongs to God. And all these stupid things they would do, and they had their right to their personal schedules and their privacies and their little club-like organization. And they had their right to their possessions. They were all wealthy. And Jesus has got them right there. They're in the group. He's preaching to them. And so that's when we get to Matthew 5, 38 through 48. He starts out, he says, you have heard the law that says the punishment must match the injury. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I say, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. If you are sued in court and your shirt is taken from you, give him your coat too. If a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile. Carry it 2 miles. Give to those who ask, and don't turn away from those who want to borrow. Now, you have heard the law that says, love your neighbor and hate your enemies. But I say, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. In that way, you will be acting out as true children of your Father in heaven. For he gives you his sunlight to both, he gives sunlight to both the good and the evil. And have you ever noticed that, when it starts to rain, it doesn't just rain on the good farmer's crop, it rains on the bad farmer's crop too. When the sun shines, it doesn't just shine on nice people, it shines on the good, bad, and the ugly. And he says, and sends rain onto the just and the unjust alike. If you love only those who love you, what reward is there for that? Even the corrupt tax collectors do that much. If you are kind only to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Even pagans do that. But you are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. That's some tough stuff to plow through. Now I want you to know that Jesus is saying this, and he doesn't mean it for governments. This isn't government information. Some people have wrongly thought that the Sermon on the Mount was behavior that your government is supposed to have. There's no indication of that at all. Matter of fact, every indication is this is your personal responsibility. This is how you are to behave. You're to be salt and light. You're to recognize that I didn't come to not fulfill. I came to fulfill the law so that you understand that if you even think about murder, you've murdered somebody. If you think about adultery, you've committed adultery. If you lust, you've committed sexual sin. He's gone through all these things, and they sound harsh and rough. And he intended for them to sound that way. He intended for them to catch your attention, that they're to be wonderfully personal. So let's take the front part. You've heard it said that punishment must match the energy, eye for an eye, truth for truth. A lot of people will say that it's, you've heard this. Well, yeah, you've heard it. Matter of fact, I can tell you where it is. It's in Exodus 21, verses 23 and 24. It's in Leviticus 24. It's in Deuteronomy 19:21. And yet he says, release instead of resist. Do you know where that came from? It's considered Mosaic law now. That Moses wrote this down in Deuteronomy, Leviticus, Exodus. Do you know that in 2285 to 2242 BC, there was a guy named Hammurabi. Yeah, however you want to say that. Hammurabi. The code of Hammurabi from Babylonian. Listen to what the code said. If a man has caused the loss of an eye, his eye one shall cause to be lost. If he has shattered a limb, one shall shatter his limb. If he has made a tooth of a man to fall out, one shall make his tooth to fall out. So Jesus is coming at it, and he's saying in these first few verses, he's saying release instead of resist. That's hard to do. That's hard to do. And he talks about if someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer your other cheek also. And he talks about a man suing you in court, and he talks about a soldier's demand for you to carry something a mile. And he talks about when somebody asks to borrow something, don't turn them away. But the whole idea of slapping somebody on the cheek, do you know what he's really talking about? Do you think he's talking about a physical backhand to your cheek? He's really talking about a slanderous comment. a slanderous comment that somebody would make to you. Matter of fact, we've got a saying for that. Well, that was a backhanded comment. That means you've been slapped on one cheek. We've misunderstood. I think about the old Irish boxer who came to know Christ as his personal Savior, and he decided he'd preach. And so instead of boxing, he went out to preach. He didn't know a lot. He just knew he got saved and he wanted to share Jesus. And so he's out traveling around. He was setting his tent up one day and pounding down the stakes, and a couple of hooligans came up to him and they started making fun of him. And one of them walked up and punched him right in the jaw. Because he was a boxer, he created just a glancing blow. And then he stood up and he stuck his chin back out again, and the guy hit him on the other side. And he allowed that to be a glancing blow. And he stopped and he removed his jacket and he began to pull up his sleeves. And he said, "Fellas, I'm sorry." He said, "The Lord gave me no more instruction than that." And he went in and punched them both out. So that's not the idea. Neither is it the idea of friendly persuasion. Was that the best movie you ever seen? I remember seeing that as a kid with Gary Cooper, Pat Boone singing that song, you know, at the front end. And yeah, and the Ducks. And the whole movie was just awesome. It's about the Civil War. It's when I think that's when I fell in love with the Civil War and its whole history and all that it was about. There's just this family out there, and they were pacifists. They used to be a very popular thing. And they took this literally. That if somebody struck you, you never struck them back. You didn't ever return any kind of violence. And I rooted the whole movie for Gary Cooper to get that old musket down. And when he did, he was a dead shot. Remember that? Boom. So it's not calling us to passively allow people to overrun you. It's not calling us to not take up arms against an enemy that might be coming at us as Americans. That's not what this teaches. It teaches us that in the initial response, try to resist instead of retaliate. Do you realize how much better life would go if you didn't retaliate? Like when you're angry, if you just stopped and just took a rest and actually thought about something before you enacted it. Yeah, I have never felt sorry about anything that I didn't respond to in anger. Right? When you're angry and you make an angry response, eventually you're going to feel bad about that. You're going to feel like you messed that up. But if you can pause, just take a second. And that's what Jesus is teaching. As a child of God, as salt and light, you're to take a blow or two. You take a hit on the cheek and a statement that's not true about you, and you can resist. You can release your rights for just a few minutes and think about it and begin to, not in an unusual way, but just begin to ask God, what does he want here? It wasn't uncommon at all for a soldier to step up behind a Jew and to smack him on the shoulder and say, "Pick that gear up and carry it a mile." And Jesus said, if that gets asked of you, pick it up, carry it 2 miles, overdo it. Great advice. Great advice. You know, people go to work, and today the work ethic is waning a bit. But you know, the best employees are those ones that kind of double up on things. Those ones that go the extra mile. You ask them for something, and they not only give you what you want, they give you double what you wanted. Those are the kind of people that you want to work with. I'll tell you one thing I've learned about millennials: if you give them something to do, you also have to give them a time frame to do it in. They need a deadline. And when they got a deadline, they'll do great. You don't give them a deadline, woo, who knows when you're going to get it. But I got one great millennial, brilliant young girl. And I walked in one day, and I'm going to talk to her about something I need done. So I'm talking to her. And as I'm talking to her, she's talking to somebody else, right? And I'm telling her what I need. I need this report. When do you need it by? Well, wouldn't mind having it before the end of the day. Well, that's pretty tight. I said, well, yeah, I can tell you're busy. And she said, yeah, I'll make every effort to get it to you. Okay. And I walked away and I thought, I don't think I'm going to see that today. And she got up, got her stuff, and left. And I thought, okay. And I'm sitting back in my desk, and I got to tell you, I'm a little upset. Because I thought, well, okay, if she wasn't on her phone and she wasn't doing that, she could have done this for me. And now I got to wait till tomorrow, and who knows what time she'll get that done tomorrow. And about then, my computer goes ding, and I look up, and there's this 3-page report sitting on my computer. And I'm looking at it, and I called her. Where are you? Driving home. I said, okay, when did you do this report? She said, I just finished it at the last light. I said, what? She said, yeah, I typed it on my way home. And I said, no, I wanted to ask you, I didn't want you to do, and she's going, no, it's okay. And I read it, and it's brilliant. So you see, you can't always tell. You can't always judge people. But there are times when Jesus is giving us great advice. And this is one of those times when he said, look, if you get sued and they want to take your shirt, give them your cloak as well. You'll look funny leaving the courtroom. But I don't think he's talking about an actual shirt. I don't think he's talking about an actual cloak. He's saying if you have something and somebody else doesn't have something, give it to them. Don't make them sue you for it. And there are things that feel like you're being sued. I told you about this before, but it's worth repeating. Elizabeth Criswell, great friend. You remember John Criswell from the news years back. This was his wife, and we were doing an event. It was at Halloween, and I saw her, and she, it was really cold. She had a coat on, and she ran home to get something. When she came back, she didn't have her coat on. She's out there just freezing. And I turned to her, I said, Elizabeth, where's your coat? And she said, oh, when I was going home, there was a girl standing on the side of the road with a sign. And she looked cold, so I gave her my coat. And I said, and it was a nice coat. You know what I'm saying? I'm an old rag guy. I know a nice coat when I see a nice coat. This was a nice coat. And I said, you gave her that coat? She said, yeah, she was cold. And I said, well, those people are charlatans. They're ripping people off. That's all phony. Somebody's going to pick her up in a van and take her back. You know what that, and she goes, she was cold. I didn't say she was holy. I didn't say she was even saved. I just said she was cold. And I gave it to her. And when I gave it to her, I said, God loves you. And I want you to have my coat. I want you to be warm. She said, she's a human being too. That's what Jesus is talking about. Nobody forced her to do that. Nobody asked her to do that, except probably the Spirit of God. He says, but I say, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. In that way, you're acting like true children of your Father. When he talks about love instead of hate, and this doesn't handle it well. There are other Bibles who handle versions that handle this better, But when he says in verse 45, he says, in that way, you will be acting as two true children of your Father in heaven. But the actual construction of the language says, when you do these kind of things, you will be father-like. Father-like. I love the sound of that. But that sounds like a great prayer. God, today, can I just be father-like? Can I just step up on some other level here that you have for me that is your desire, and can I be father-like? And so that's when he's talking about love instead of hate. He's talking about being father-like. And then the last portion, when he's talking about being perfect and not merely human, that's some pretty difficult stuff to listen to. In verse 46, he says, if you love only those who love you, what reward is there for that? Anybody can love people that love them. That's no big deal. It's the unlovable that are hard to love. He says, even corrupt tax collectors can do that much. But then he goes on, he says, if you are kind only to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Even pagans do that. So he finishes by saying, but you are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Does that rattle your cage? How'd your day go today? Do you think you were as perfect as God today? Can't get there, can you? Can't get there. That's why in the Beatitudes he said, blessed are you who hunger and thirst after righteousness. And the righteousness he talks about is our unattainable righteousness that comes from God. He's talking about a divine demand. Be perfect. And I know some people who are trying to be perfect. And you know what they're being? Crazy people. Have you ever been with anybody that's a perfectionist? You want something to wear you down? Find you a perfectionist. Hang out with them for a little while. Nothing is right. Nothing. That's not what he's talking about. That's not at all what he's talking about. He's talking about perfection for us with God is that you fulfill your purpose. So that means you need to know what your purpose is. If you're going to fulfill your purpose, you have to recognize, what is my purpose? What does God have for me so that I might fulfill it? It's actually a working term. It's the idea of a tool when he's saying be perfect. And it's the idea that there's one particular tool that will do that work. And if you have the right tool, doing that work will be very, very simple. And without it, it becomes complex. That's what he's talking about. The first thing I thought of when I thought, oh, he's talking about a tool. He's talking about fulfilling something and putting something together and fixing something as a child of God. That father-like work that you did today, that gospel that you shared, the coat that you gave away, the extra mile you worked, whatever it is you did this day, that was the perfect tool. Like a runner staying in his lane and running in his lane and getting his job done. That's what God's talking about here. And I thought about a little tool that I was encountered not too long ago. I was down at Ryan's house, and he wanted to replace 2 toilets. So to replace a toilet, you have to take the old one out. And there's 2 little screws. They come up along the side, and that's what holds the toilets in. For you ladies who had boys when they were babies, you know, these are you can identify these 2 places because there's usually a yellow ring around it. My mother used to hand me a brush and say, I'm not cleaning that yellow ring. And so the idea is you take those nuts off, and then the toilet comes right up, and then there's this little wax thing you put right down, and then you take the other toilet and you put it right down. But you know the most difficult thing is you got to set it down perfect, or you got to start all over on this wax round thing right there. And I mean, you got to lay it down exactly right. And those two bolts have to stick straight up so that they can go right through the holes. Guess what doesn't want to stand straight up? And usually the area you got to work in, you need this much area, and the area you got to work in is this big. And so you balance those things up, and you think you got them up, and you're trying all kinds of things. And I mean, you know, Ryan and I even tied a little string around them and ran the string through the holes and held them up, and you know, put the toilet down. And we're trying all kinds of different things. And finally, somehow that kind of worked, and we got that toilet in and got it mounted. Now, it took a lot of DAP to cover up the gap, and we had to throw a couple of shims under it so you didn't rock while you're on the toilet. But we got that sucker in. And as soon as we got it down there, we opened up the second toilet, and we saw this little plastic thing. And we read the instructions. They send a little plastic thing, and you know what it does? It holds those things up. You put this little plastic thing on there, and it just stands them straight up until you drop the toilet on it, and then the little plastic things just go away, they get crushed. What a great invention. Now that is perfect. That's something that fulfilled its purpose. And that second toilet, first one took us about 3.5 hours. Second one, 15 minutes. Toilet's down, steady, ready to go. That's what he's talking about. You need to be that little plastic thing, even. It doesn't have to be a big deal. Just fulfill something in God's purpose on a regular basis. That's what he's saying. So how do you apply that? Well, with your family, I think what he's telling us is release your rights. Release your rights. I mean, you want great marital advice? There it is. I get all kinds of people in my office, you know, married couples, and they got messes going all kinds of different directions. And matter of fact, I remember talking to one, and I'm listening to them, and they're just going off, you know. And I said, well, the problem here is somebody in this marriage needs to die. And I was talking metaphorically. And the woman looked at me and she said, that's a great idea. How are we going to kill him? That's not what I was going for. What I meant was somebody had to release their rights or the marriage was not going to move forward. Number one job when you're sitting before a little couple that's struggling and they're just fighting and fussing, first thing I start saying, who's going to be the first to release a right to dignity, a right to comfort, a right to your personal privacy. Which one of you is going to be first to release those rights, the rights to your possession? Who's going to be the first one to make the move? You see, it's real easy to retaliate. It's real easy to get into vengeance and I'm going to get even and you're not going to get on top of me and you're not going to beat me, I'm going to beat you. That's easy. What's hard is to catch yourself and stop and release it instead of retaliate. It really is the better way to go. I had something happen this week, and whoo, boy, I was ready to retaliate. I should retaliate. I got counsel to retaliate, right? Because that's what the world tells you to do. But then you release your right, and you say, no, I'm not going to retaliate. I think I'm just going to let that sit there for a while and see what happens.
Steve?
Yep.
I can kind of go along with that. When I was shot, I remember the second day I was in my room, my cousins were all in there and they said, what are we going to do now? I said, what do you mean? What are we going to do to get even? Not to do a thing. all going to work itself out. That just put us in the same shoes the person who did this was in. And I think I have pretty good reason to retaliate if I want to.
People who retaliate are putting themselves just deeper and deeper into a cave, into a prison. And you can spend your whole life retaliating. You can. And you can even convince yourself you're not really retaliating, especially if you got a smart mouth. And you're witty and you're a little bit funny. You can retaliate through humor. I understand. I know how to do that. For years, I have said some of the harshest, most difficult things to other people in the form of satirical humor. It's a way to retaliate. It's a way to make somebody look silly or stupid. You know, somebody asked me not long ago, why'd you wait till now to pastor, to like be the head pastor? And my answer is, because I know the 40-year-old me. I knew the 50-year-old me. You do something I don't like, man, I got enough wit and humor in me, I can chew you up, spit you out, you don't even know what happened. You might not even know you've been retaliated. You might get home before you discover you got retaliated. That you got whacked not only on one cheek, but both cheeks. I know that guy. That guy had no business being a pastor. It's a lot of fun at the party, but it's not too good from the pulpit. And so, we, you know, to apply what he's saying, we have to release our rights, or we're not going to ever do it within our family. With friends, look beyond the wrong. Friends aren't going to get it all right. Have you noticed? Any of you ever had a friend do a wrong thing to you? Any of you ever had a friend that didn't never do a wrong thing to you? No. Our friends are going to disappoint us. They're going to hurt us. You're going to let them in because they're in so close. They can do things that are going to hurt. Feel like, you know, make you feel bad. But truth is, you just kind of look beyond the wrongs. When you can make peace with somebody and understand they're probably doing the best they can with their equipment, you're going to be a great friend. When you realize some people are in this world are a bit more damaged than others, and you can look beyond some of their anger and some of their frustration, and you can show an empathetic heart. You can show the love of Jesus, and that's what he's saying. Did you ever notice how Jesus responded to angry people when they'd get up in his face, yell at him, say something to him, call him names, spit on him? He looked beyond the wrongs. Looked beyond every wrong every man was ever going to commit and walked to Calvary. Then how do you apply it with your enemies? You fulfill your job. You live a crucified kind of life. You fulfill your place in the kingdom. You figure out what it is that God wants you to do, and it's not that hard to find. You get a lot of scripture giving you some walking orders, and you just pay attention to it, and you just walk into that, and you become that tool that God can use to tighten that one nut down that he needs tightened down. That's what you do with your enemies. You become that one great tool. There's a, I just learned this the other day, there's a great big nut that holds on a propeller on a helicopter. And that nut's called the Jesus nut. It's called the Jesus nut because if that nut comes off, the propeller goes off, and you go to Jesus if you're in the helicopter. And so there's one tool, and only one, that fulfills the job. And it's a great big tool that every mechanic that does work on on a helicopter has. It's a big old giant thing, and they put it up there around that nut, and it closes with pressure on it, and you shove it around till you can't shove it anymore, and it's pressure treated, so you hear it tick, 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 and you undo it. And every pilot that ever gets on a helicopter, every Marine, Navy, or Army pilot getting ready to get up on a helicopter always looks at the mechanic and asks one question. Did you check the Jesus nut? And when he gets an affirmative, then he knows he can leave. So check your Jesus nut every day. You're that one tool. You're it. You're the only Jesus nut in your portion of the world. So you need to tighten it down and fulfill what it is that God's calling you to do. Okay? Let's pray. God, help us. Help us to understand that your teaching is pristine and that it runs so counterculture and so far different from what our humanness wants to do. And yet, God, you called us to be father-like. I pray, Lord, you would equip us now to be that one fulfilling tool in our world, that we would always be ready to share your love, be ready to witness about you, and be ready to live our lives in a way that honors and glorifies the Lord Jesus Christ. For it's in his name we pray. Amen.